Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our second online talk, and it's good to see so many participants from around the world, which is great. Tonight's talk is by Dr. Robyne Calvert, and she's Mackintosh Research Fellow in charge of fostering innovative research projects arising from the reconstruction of the Mackintosh building. She was previously a lecturer in history and theory at GSA and is also visiting lecturer in art and design history at the University of Glasgow. So tonight's talk it's about Charles Rennie Mackintosh and his partner Margaret Macdonald. So I'll pass you over to Robin, who will take you through and give you an insight into their wonderful relationship. Thank you.
Thanks, Stuart. And thank you, everybody. I'm really excited to be here. I wish we were all in Queen's Cross Church. However, it's kind of cool that we're not, since we've got people here from Spain and Tennessee and Chicago and France. And that's one of the wonderful things, I guess, we can take out of this period, that we can do stuff like this. I've been to many, many talks, given just a few little ones. So this is pretty exciting to have this many people show up from all over. I can say a little bit more about myself. I moved to Glasgow 15 years ago I'm from Miami originally, and I moved here for Mackintosh, but actually I didn't. I kind of moved here for Margaret Macdonald, really. I came here to do graduate school, and I got lucky enough to be able to stick around, and the Mackintosh community has been very lovely, and it's been an amazing place to kind of be involved, and generous scholars and incredible people to work with. So what I'm talking about tonight is it's an interesting one because a lot of the research is stuff that I did a long time ago. Some of it is research I've done really recently, and some of it is work that I haven't done yet at all and really want to go and do. So I've combined a few things together. I am going to read, I normally just kind of ramble on when it's a public talk, but I thought it'd be better if I kind of read some bits and pieces and talk you through some of this. And I'm mostly going to talk about Mackintosh Macdonald, but I am going to talk about a few of their friends and family just briefly, because I think this whole problem about sort of creative collaborations between intimate couples is a really interesting one. And we know historically across the history of art, a lot of times there's a, in the cases of couples that are men and women, but sometimes not even women, sometimes two women, there's usually two men, there's usually a kind of art star and someone who gets a little marginalized, a Jackson Pollock and a Lee Krasner, and you can make a long, long list of this. And Margaret Macdonald has arguably been one of those people in the past. As I said, it's going to be a bit brief for some of them, but I'm going to kind of rumble through a few different topics now. So I think the place that we have to start in looking at this, these Künstlerpaars, which is a term that was coined by he called Herman Muthesius, the German critic and great friend of the Mackintoshes, called them the Künstlerpaar, the art couple. And I hope I'm not butchering German too much, because it's not my specialty. But the place I want to start is with the notorious love triangle, and I just want to help to clear this up. Okay, so one of my favorite items in the Glasgow School of Art collection is a photo album of the Immortals. The Immortals are a group of friends, a group of women friends who were studying at the art school in the 1890s and whose artistic interests can most clearly be seen in this wonderful group, in their wonderful group effort, the magazine, which is available online. I can send you a link later, or if somebody's got the link for the magazine.net, you can look through it. It's this incredible album of their drawings and stories that they worked on together. Their interest in symbolist art and fairy tales is very clear in this album. And in her 1990 book, Glasgow Girls, Jude Burkhauser suggested that the self-styled moniker of this group, the Immortals, may have been inspired by Celtic mysticism. She also suggests that these women artists are calling themselves immortals as a kind of reference to the kind of posterity that's usually reserved for male artists from the academic variety, which very few females got to enjoy. But looking at the photo album, which is full of pictures of the women on a day out in the Ayrshire countryside, with a few of their male companions, one might simply think that their being immortals might just be down to that youthful feeling of invincibility and what happens when such carefree moments are captured in a photograph to be shared in an unknown future, even via the form of technology they cannot yet perhaps dream of, like today. So perhaps the most well-known photo from this album is the one just here of the women standing 3 and 3 with the 20-something Charles Rennie Mackintosh poised between them. He's not the usual focus of discussion of this image, however. That's been reserved for this interesting exchange between the two women at far right. That's Jessie Keppie, John Keppie's sister. John Keppie was Mackintosh's boss. And Margaret Macdonald. So this, I should say, these photos, if I haven't, they're taken around, we think 1893. So right around the time that they probably met. So the portrait that's painted of these two women in text is not always very flattering. And in William Buchanan's Mackintosh's masterwork, The Glasgow School of Art, which is a fantastic book and it's beautifully written. And I love this book for many reasons, but except for this one thing. William Buchanan wrote about these two on the right. There's an astonishing, vivid, and frank expression on the fraught relationship between Jessie and Margaret caught in one of the photographs taken in the mid-1890s. Jessie Keppie, standing second from the right with her fist held provocatively, turns to confront Margaret Macdonald. The smaller Margaret stands her ground and stares back. It is not without a frisson. Now, the context, if you don't know, is that apparently Mackintosh was engaged to Jessie Keppie and he jilted her for Margaret Macdonald. Okay, so because of that little piece of rumor, this is how William Buchanan reads this photograph as Jessie Keppie turning her fist provocatively towards Margaret in a confrontational way. And I've really been bothered by this characterization of Jessie Keppie and Margaret Macdonald being at odds in this photo, because to my eye, they look like they're gazing at each other in familiarity. And although the image is hazy, even when you see it in person, one can see that they're exchanging an amused glance. Keppie's hand is not in a fist, as the quote above suggests, but in an open palm gesture towards her friend. What is it that's made others have such a negative reading of this image? So as I've said, it's unfortunately an interpretation of this rumored love triangle between the two women in Mackintosh. So it's been assumed that they were, but that Charles and Jessie were betrothed during this period, and he's seen next to her in some of the photos. But because of the story of the broken engagement, some have surmised that this photo has been a photo of attention, at war over the love of the charismatic man at the center. Yeah, I see someone said the male gaze. I'm right there with you. Okay, so William Buchanan isn't the only person to view this image in this way. The story that Mackintosh jilted his boss's sister is one that has been commonly repeated. According to Roger Bilcliffe, it may have initially been told to Mackintosh's first major biographer, Thomas Howarth, by Frances and Jesse Newbery's daughter, Mary. But as Bilcliffe very wonderfully points out in his most recent book, The Art of the Four, which is a fabulous book if you don't have it, he says that Mary wasn't even born yet when these events took place. She would have been quoting or making deductions from later family discussions. And he also reports that when he was able to actually interview Mary many years later after Howarth, in discussions with him, she actually modified the word engagement to an understanding, as close perhaps to a withdrawal with the original suggestion as she was able to make. So I was really refreshed to read that. And I've heard Roger speak about this too, that he felt like there were other things about some of the work that they made together. It didn't quite make sense that they had been engaged. It also doesn't really make sense if you think about the fact that he jilts his boss's daughter. That's not necessary, but then he goes on to work with him for years. So, I mean, again, this is just all supposition, but to use this photograph as some sort of proof is just weird. But in case I was just being biased and everything, I decided to do some really hardcore research on this. And I put this picture on the internet. I put it on Facebook. And I asked my friends from all over the world who don't know anything about what I do, old high school friends, people who have no idea who these people are. And I simply just said, what do you think's going on between these two women? What would you say? I left it very open, like, what do you think's happening? And overwhelmingly, everyone was saying, oh, they look like they're joking. They look like it's camaraderie, it's friendship. Who's that cheeky guy in the middle? They look like they're like rolling their eyes at him. I mean, there was a lot of that kind of discussion going on. Nobody saw it as a negative exchange, not a person. And also, it's important to view these photos in the context of other ones that are in the album, because I imagine this to be a moment right before or right after that one. There's this really, really beautiful photograph of the women. They're still in the same order as they are in the previous one, but they're turned back, their arms linked as they're looking out over the countryside. I mean, how can you say that the first is a Frisian and her fist turned towards them when the second one is this with their arms all linked? So that's kind of all I really wanted to say about that. To kind of kick things off, because the love triangle, I think, is this really kind of mythic story that I don't think plays out very well. It certainly doesn't play out in that photograph, but it also underscores the fact that relationships and a sense of community really, underscore this group as a whole. They're friends, they are studying together at art school, they're making work together, and they're coming into themselves as artists in a sense of a community that's designed to be collaborative, that encourages collaboration. They're working with each other. So there's actually all kinds of Künstlerpaars within this. And the first one really for me is the art couple is Margaret and Frances MacDonald. When they work together, they share a studio together. They make beautiful work like the pieces I'm showing you here of these watercolors and repoussé frames on the seasons, where they each did 2 of the seasons. And then they go on after they meet MacNair and Mackintosh and become the Four, as they've come to be known as, working a little bit collaboratively, but then really just breaking off into their couples and working with each other. So, of the 4, when MacNair was asked about them, he was the only living person left later on. He had said about them, not a line was drawn without purpose, and rarely was a single motif employed that had not some allegorical meaning. So they never had a written manifesto or anything, but there was a clear visual agenda, and their elongated female forms, natural motifs, mythical and spiritual subject matter, repeated use of symbols, the rose in particular, which I'm going to talk quite a bit about in just a minute. But they're basically working as symbolist artists. This is Scottish symbolist practice, symbolism in the art movement. This other really wonderful slide came later with Alistair Moffat, who did interviews with people who knew them. And Lady Alice Barnes said, Toshi and Margaret, they were very close indeed. You never saw one without the other. They always did absolutely everything together, hand in glove throughout their lives. So after a century of scholarship, we're still intrigued about them and somewhat perplexed by Mackintosh's working relationship with his wife and artistic partner, Margaret. No one denies that MacDonald played a critical role in Mackintosh's world, but to what extent her influence is felt in his work is still a matter of debate. Lack of documentary evidence, as well as the shifting poles of scholarship from early 20th century more patriarchal to more recent feminist outlooks, has actually kind of muddled this subject. Some argue we've swung too far in the other direction. Modernist critics back in the early 20th century, like P. Morton Shan, were derisive of Mackintosh's more decorative interiors and famously blamed MacDonald for a perceived lapse into a feminine style. Shan's disdain was clear when he wrote to William Davidson in 1933 when he was organizing the memorial exhibition. He said, outside of her circle of loyal friends in Glasgow and Chelsea, her work is either unknown or long since forgotten, and the future is scarcely like to see her rather thin talent restored to a place of honor. And I think we've gotten a lot better in talking about her, but I have to always like to point out this souvenir mug that you could buy in places like the Lighthouse. in which it's very cutely Charles Rennie Mackintosh on the outside, but then the little picture in the middle is basically her asking him if he wants some lunch while he does work. And I just want to break this mug every time I see it, quite frankly. She's going to fix him his lunch. I mean, I don't know if she made a good sand cake, apparently. Maybe she made him some lunch. I'm not saying that making lunch for the person you love is a bad thing, but this is how we're depicting her on a mug. He's working, she's making lunch. So, I mean, you might ask though, why does this debate really matter? We know that they work together. Can we not just accept that? Can we accept that we might not ever really know exactly how their collaboration works? Because we won't. There's not enough evidence, and that's a valid point. And yet, it's still, I think, a compelling mystery. So, let's recap really quickly what we do know about them. In a rare and often repeated example, on the 12th of January 1900, mere months before they were married, Mackintosh wrote his friend, the German architect, an author who I mentioned earlier, Herman Muthesius, about the Ingram Street Lunch and Tea Room Commission. And he wrote to him and said, "Just now we are working on 2 large panels for the frieze. Miss Macdonald is doing one and I'm doing the other. We are working them together and that makes the work very pleasant." So what does this even mean? Do they move back and forth between them, sharing ideas or hints or adding touches to each other's work? What does together signify for these two? This is where Muthesius, with his intimate understanding of his friends, dubbed them the Künstlerpaar, the art couple. The only other verifiable evidence of Mackintosh's own words on his working relationship with Macdonald are found in the remaining letters that he wrote to her during his stay in France in 1927. Hers are unfortunately lost. And here he writes to her, "You must remember that in all my architectural efforts, you have been half, if not 3/4, in them." The context for this oft-quoted remark is often omitted. He was writing Macdonald to ask her if she'd give a short interview to Christian Barman of the Architect's Journal before his pending trip to Glasgow, and he was assuring her that she was fully capable of discussing his architectural designs. This is perhaps questionable evidence that Macdonald was a collaborator in these efforts, but it would seem to indicate, at least in Mackintosh's eyes, that she was quite a significant source of influence, if not an outright artistic partner. Mackintosh's letters are evidence of his abiding affection. Oh, I'll just say very quickly that Margaret has eye of talent, Margaret has genius. That's kind of a secondhand hearsay quote that gets pulled out. So that's a little bit, that's why I say the evidence. These are the evidenced ones. Mackintosh's letters are evidence of his abiding affection for Macdonald, even in the waning years of his life, but little else of their practice together is revealed. And so we're left to scrutinize their work and try to determine how their artistic partnership worked. We can perhaps agree that it was born out of creative camaraderie, aesthetic sympathies, and imaginative pleasure that flowed naturally from their artistic education, stylistic development, and their close personal relationship. They worked together not out of necessity. Glasgow had a rich offering of artisans, and Mackintosh employed them to construct his buildings, create his furniture, and paint the walls of his decorative interiors. The Mackintoshes worked together because they desired to do so. And as a consequence, we might be unsurprised that one of the themes underpinning much of their collaborative work is romantic love. The theme is intermingled with the bolder philosophical subjects of life and death cycles, which can be found repeatedly in the symbolist narratives they crafted together, particularly in the spaces for which Macdonald contributed to art and design. At the Ingram Street Tea Rooms, the May Queen and the Wassail sat opposite each other, representing summer and winter respectively, the death and birth of the seasons. The Salon Deluxe at the Willow Tea Rooms offered a program based on Rossetti's Willowwood sonnets of love lost, death, and the afterlife, and letting go. Slumbering princesses in rest or in depth find their way into other of Macdonald's art, and signs of nature blooming and fading abound in Mackintosh's architecture. And in both of their work, women, and sometimes man, are conflated with plants and trees to present the fecundity of the natural world to which we are all connected. In examining these recurring motifs, A Rose Boudouir deserves closer scrutiny. Perhaps more than any other, this room is exemplary of the allegorical interest in romantic love they had. It was created for the 1902 International Exhibition of Modern Art in Turin, and it is perhaps its ephemeral nature that deeper interpretation of the space has been overlooked. It exists for us only in a few grainy black and white photos published in the Studio magazine, and its component parts, a slightly eclectic mix curated by Mackintosh, have long been dispersed. But for 6 months, these pieces comprised a boudoir, a lady's sitting room where she might receive intimate friends and relations. Now, when Mackintosh sent these works to Turin, he indicated on a manifest that duplicates only were available for sale. And you can see here, and I'm talking specifically about the gesso panels. Here they are listed, which I'm going to go through these a little more in a minute. And you can see there it says duplicates only. I want to bring this up here because I'm very interested in the idea. I'm about to give you this wonderful, well, I don't know if it's wonderful, it's my thoughts, the allegorical interpretation of this room. But this room was made to sell their work. It's an exhibition. It's to show what they can do. So the fact that even they create this kind of space that actually has a narrative doesn't mean that it necessarily, they're so precious about it that these works can't go out and be duplicated. And in fact, in the case of the two main gesso panels, there are 2 copies of them, which many of you may know. So the ones that were shown in Turin are these 2 in the bottom, and they have a kind of warmer red tone to them. And the other 2 versions had the same design, but with a different palette and different surface detail I'll talk more about in a minute. These 2 panels were in a private collection for a long time. They were in the collection of the Taffners, and in 2008, they were auctioned off to go to 2 separate collections. This version of the White Rose and the Red Rose is in the Hunterian. It's in the Mackintosh house. And the other version, which you'll see more in a minute, was originally installed in a mantle made for Wiley Hill, who was a cousin of Jesse Newbery. And it is now in the collection of Glasgow School of Art. But as I said, the Turin panels were auctioned in 2008. And in fact, it was very exciting at the time. I'm sure lots of us maybe went to go see them because they came to Glasgow on a visit and they were on display at the art club. And then they were estimated at you can see 200 to 300,000 and went for 1,705,000. I was a grad student at the time. I was in the room during the auction. I went down for it and I was, basically sweating and trying not to raise my hand to bid like I could ever afford it. But I was very sad when they went off to 2 different collections because they had been together since Turin, since they were part of that exhibition. But when they were at the art club, what was very nice is that the very lovely people at Christie's allowed me to photograph the back of it so I could see what that looked like, that structure that holds the gesso together. And you can see it's these, basically it's a wooden frame that has the plaster kind of layered over it, and it's quite thick. Well, that's important because here, I'm showing you, this is the version from the Glasgow School of Art, and it's recently had some very noteworthy conservation as part of the GSA Collection Recovery Project. I know that this was one of the first items to come out of the furniture gallery when the building went on fire in 2014. And so it was really in need of cleaning anyway. So there's, I guess some silver linings. And here it is on the easel at Graciela Ainsworth Conservation Studio in Edinburgh. And I don't know if you can tell very well from this photo, but you can see how thin it is in comparison to this. It's actually just like that. It's very, very thin. So what was really quite exciting about it is through the conservation work, Graciela was able to determine that this is in fact not a gesso panel as we've come to understand them, this layering of plaster with piped on surface. It's actually a plaster cast. It was made from a mold. It's a single piece of plaster that's been painted. Now, I don't know if that sounds very exciting to you, but I was basically beside myself with excitement talking to Graciela because I was able from the research side to go, yes, they said duplicates were available in the manifest. And so I was always wondering how she did it. I thought she had a cartoon, but she made a mold of these and they were going to make multiple versions. And it was just very interesting from a technical perspective. And you can actually see by comparing close-up photos of the cracks of the surface. So what's kind of interesting, this is a little bit of a side story, and I'd love to find out do some investigation further, is the panel that's at the Hunterian, the White Rose and the Red Rose, does have beads in the surface. It is a gesso panel, it's not a cast. So it begs the question, the other Turin panel that went to a different buyer, is that actually a plaster cast and not really a gesso panel? So anyway, this is really nerdy stuff, and I don't know if that's very interesting, but it's very interesting to me. But again, it just shows that they were willing to have these individual pieces sold on their own merit. But returning back to the actual Rose Boudouir, that doesn't mean that there wasn't this amazing narrative. I think what's particularly interesting about it is it was in this one space and time, these objects came together to form this narrative. So I'm going to talk you through that now. Take a little sip. So the Rose Boudouir was a shallow, wide space colored in pinks and lavenders against a creamy white background. The lighting, which Mackintosh cleverly hung at the height of the display, so it would detract from the ceiling height and kind of bring your eye level down to a more human level. He did that, of course, in his home and lots of other places. The lighting cast a soft glow around a pastel interior, decorated with art items of furniture, ceramics, and textiles by both artists. At left and right were Macdonald's gesso panels. You see them here. Here's the white rose and the red rose, and here's the heart of the rose, facing each other across the expanse of the room. In the center left of the room were two high-back white chairs, an oval table topped with an elaborate round bowl of flowers designed by Margaret Macdonald. And just behind this and to the right is this writing cabinet, which was designed by Mackintosh with 3 more small panels by Macdonald set into it. And the rose theme was carried out through the entire decor in style or subject, but it was these 3 key objects, the gessos and the writing cabinet, which actually relate an allegorical tale of the union between pure and passionate love. These 3 items here. So here's the 2 gessos. Here's the cabinet with 3 panels in it, except actually there's 5 panels. You'll see in just a moment. So the tale begins on the left wall of the Rose Boudouir with the white rose and the red rose. The white rose stands at center, and behind her and to the right is the red rose, leaning gently towards her as if whispering in her ear. She is passionate love, gently coaxing pure love to bloom. Now here's the cabinet closed. And I confess, when I first did this research and wrote graduate degrees on it, I had never seen the cabinet closed. So when I finally saw a picture of it closed, I was very excited because I am arguing here that the cabinet is anthropomorphic. So it stands in for the human body, and particularly the female human body, as you'll see in a moment. So I am going to suggest to you right now that these are representations of breasts, okay? They are. And sometimes we have sexual female bodies and everything in this work, and sometimes we don't, and everyone sees things and they want to read into it. And I'm pleased Fergus is here. I know we've had these discussions with Niall and Glasgow City Heritage people for years. So if this cabinet is a body, okay, then here it is open. So white rose and the red rose coaxing the white rose to bloom. The second panel in the tale is in the left-hand cabinet. It is the dreaming rose. And here we see the white rose sleeping, dreaming of children which hover on either side of her head. Her form is tinged in the red of passionate love. This is a liminal dream space.
Start video. Of wat is het?
Oh, I'll mute that person. There we go. So this is a liminal dream space, a place between the physical and material worlds. And like the transfigurative moment of an annunciation, it enables the physical conception of her child, which is here at the center of the cabinet, a small panel of gesso and metal entitled The Spirit of Love. It's actually silvered paint. It's perhaps the most austere of all of Macdonald's panels that she's made. It's a simple composition that suggests a baby lying under a blanket, sleeping peacefully, a half-formed entity. It's the resting spirit of love. The red rose is placed in the white womb of the white rose. And, oh, someone's drawing on my thing. I've never seen that happen. So if you imagine, as I said, is the cabinet is a body, when it's closed, this little child spirit is in the inside, in the womb of the cabinet. And then in the right door, we have the Awaken Rose, where the white rose is now in full bloom, her body round as she carries the child within her. Her white gown is tinged in red to the right, where the red rose stood in the first panel, and suggesting the swollen pregnant figure. And then finally, the heart of the rose provides the happy ending to this fairy tale. The white rose stands with her garment still blooming, and in front of her, she holds a newborn swaddled in a red blanket that is distinctly the form of a rose. The red rose stands quietly to her right, and these sisters gaze serenely down at the child, loving smiles on their faces. The child is the spirit of love, the joyous result of this passionate, pure encounter. So when considered together, the collective tale of the panels fits directly into the rich iconography of the rose historically, really. The rose was an attribute of Venus. It's been a symbol of love since antiquity. It's also a Christian symbol associated with the blood of Christ as well as the Virgin. And the relationship of Macdonald's panels to an Annunciation story shouldn't be overlooked. It is a divine creation that we're looking at. And they did make illuminated work that had Christian themes to it. Yet what's also significant is the way in which these traditional symbols have been appropriated and reinvented for the purpose of the artist. Again, the Mackintoshes were very much symbolist artists, and they took a familiar symbol and recontextualized it so that their work was somewhat ambiguous yet coded for those who wish to find meaning. They offered enough by the way of the titles to suggest what their narrative intentions were, but beyond this didn't publicly explain the work. By placing these images in the context of a boudoir, a private family room, they cleverly offered a sample of their work, which created an atmosphere of both romantic and familial love in a space intended for domestic intimacy. So the Rose Boudoir is a collection of objects and as a curated space exemplifies the difficulties in understanding the Mackintosh-Macdonald partnership, but perhaps opens up more questions than it answers. Was this merely a sort of pick a mix of items and of their singular or collaborative creation? Was it easy to curate such a unified space because of the like-minded repetition of themes? Did Macdonald have her say in the selection? And were the Jessos and cabinet very clearly made as a group due to their combined narrative, something that the two conceived of together? And of course, these point to even larger questions. Might we consider that the Gesamtkunstwerk philosophy, that's a total work of art, that's what that means, was not just present in the work they co-created, gesso panels and interiors, poetically and significantly entwined, but manifested in their very lives as two singular artists working in concert? So I'm leaving that as a question. And as I said earlier, Mackintosh actually curated the whole Scottish section of the Turin exhibition, and it represented more than just the Rose Boudoir. And in fact, all the other couples I'm just about to talk to you about were also part of the Turin exhibition. Francis Newbery was the main organizer. He sort of orchestrated the whole thing happening and then brought Mackintosh in to curate the spaces and build the architecture in it. His wife, Jesse Newbery, showed work alongside Jesse M. King, E.A. Taylor, and Frances and Herbert MacNair. Each of these couples is worthy of a talk in their own right, but in the interest of your attention, I'm just going to touch on each one of them very briefly. The MacNair story, as many of you know, is the least happy. And despite happiness in their early marriage, they spent in Liverpool. They struggled financially, and their fortunes were further affected by MacNair's alcoholism, for which he was sent by the family away to Canada to dry out in 1912. We actually do have a letter at the Glasgow School of Art from Jesse Newbery writing a colleague to ask support for him in finding work while he's in Canada because of his drink problem. Frances MacDonald lived unhappily in Liverpool and then moving back to Glasgow. And this 1911 watercolor has been seen by some to be really emblematic of her feelings of this period. It's called "Man Makes the Beads of Life, but Woman Must Thread Them." And we might imagine it represents her own feelings of trying to keep together a family and raise a small son while relying on an addict for security. Both were in Glasgow later on, and work was still sparse. Newbery tried to find work for them at the art school, and it wasn't coming through. and very little art was created during this period. By oral account, Frances MacDonald took her own life on the 12th of December, 1921, and in his despair, MacNair reportedly destroyed much of her work left behind. So this is a very tragic tale, and it ends up overshadowing a lot of the happier start to their union that this vibrant new couple that we saw here earlier, clasping hands in the Ayrshire countryside. But we can see some of that domestic happiness in the ladies' writing room at Turin, because it was created from many of their own personal effects from their own flat in Liverpool. The Settle is a collaborative piece. It was designed by MacNair with soft furnishings by Macdonald. You can see it a little bit better in that earlier picture there. And the Studio magazine commented about the clever harmony of the room. By the way, that's their flat. These are the two, this is the ladies' writing room in Turin, and then that is their flat, and you can see the Settle there, and very similar kinds of frieze. So in the studio, as I said, they commented about the clever harmony of the room. They said, this second room, because this is right across the way from the Rose Boudouir, incidentally, the second room demonstrates how the same motif in the hands of differing artists becomes like a new thing. And the utmost credit is due to the MacNairs for this object lesson, showing in what manner the necessities and beauties of life can be brought together in one harmonious whole. From a baby's crawling rug to a silver figure panel is a far cry. The one room contains them, and to united brains working through helping hands, we owe the beauty of both. United brains working through helping hands, like that. To learn more on the MacNairs, I have to say, you should really track down a copy of the catalog for the 2006 exhibit Doves and Dreams, which has been really particularly good essays on their life and work. There's a really wonderful essay by Janice Helland in there in particular that talks a lot about this. So the Turin article, the studio article rather, on the Turin exhibition goes on to talk about the work of all of these artists and mentions specifically the unity of their forms and the scheme of color common to all. And so here we have a common thread, a Glasgow style thread, if you will, which binds them, and which history is credited to Mackintosh as a leader. But was it not Newbery, who was the head of the Glasgow School of Art, who introduced, encouraged, and brought together this group? His own painting is distinct from what we call Glasgow style. He was much closer to the look of the Glasgow boys that he associated with and was friends with through the Glasgow Art Club. And, you know, we might wonder why he didn't experiment with it more, but perhaps he thought it was best to leave it to his supremely gifted wife, Jessie, who he first encountered when she was a student at the school in 1884. Jessie Rowett grew up in a forward-thinking family in Paisley that was connected to the shawl industry. And her father believed in education for women, and she trained in drawing and painting and anatomy in Paisley, a design course in textiles and stained glass at GSA, where she was a student from 1884 to 1888, when she met the new dashing headmaster, Francis Newbery. She married him in 1889, and then she taught at the school until 1908. Most famously drastically reorganizing and really being a pioneer behind the art needlework program. In 1894, Anne Macbeth was her student and took on from there. But what's really radical about this teaching there from 1889 to 1908 is she was married and she had 2 daughters in the process in 1890 and 1892. And this was relatively unheard of. When you got married, you quit working and became a wife. And if any of you saw the Modern Scottish Women exhibit at the Scottish National Gallery a couple years ago, it talks about this. It was a wonderful exhibit. We've lost so many women artists' names because of this, actually. So this is a Künstlerpaar, but it's not so much a creative couple working in collaboration on artwork as it is a creative union of like-minded radical thinkers. George Rawson, who I hope a lot of you came to the talk on George's book last week, was fantastic. George has written considerably about Newbery. His work is brilliant on this subject, and he wrote in his PhD on this. Newbery's attitude to women as staff and students engaged in art, however, was enlightened for his day. No women were denied entry into any particular class, and Newbery never seemed to have maintained, unlike some of his contemporaries, that women should be discouraged from attempting some areas of artistic work. In an essay on the work of Anne Macbeth, Jesse Newbery's successor as a needlework instructor, he observed that the association of needle is with a woman's hand. And he says, as the plow to the peasant or the pen to the writer, so the needle lives in our sentiments as the personal effect of the woman, embroidery, the art by instinct of the woman. And it's a little bit, but I think he means this is a very positive thing. It's like a place in which a woman has power and talent and agency. So the other thing just to mention quickly about Newbery, which is a whole side thing, is he was very much interested in sort of alternative educational philosophies of the day, particularly Froebel and Sloyd. And Froebel, since I know there's someone Frank Lloyd Wright fan out there, Froebel's blocks is what Frank Lloyd Wright played with as a young boy that got him his spatial acuity. And these are the philosophies that give birth to things like kindergarten and Montessori schools and things. And it's the idea that there's innate talents that you might nurture, but you start from an early age in the spark. And it's all very new, radical kind of, and very much tied to socialist and the arts and crafts ways of thinking. I'm mentioning that because Jesse Newbery talks about this really beautifully as well. There's in a article by Gleason White on the Studio, some Glasgow artists and their work, in which Jesse Newbery is highlighted. Gleason White has this really great quote. In days when Ibsen and married women's property acts are bent on isolating the once dual personality of husband and wife, perhaps it would be more seemly to pretend to forget that Jesse R. Newbery of the Arts and Crafts exhibitions is in any way related to the Glasgow painter who exhibits at the New English Art Club and elsewhere, and is also the director of a very important school. So he's saying, let's look at her own merits, not the fact that she's married to this important guy. But then it also includes these really wonderful quotes from Jesse Newbery, just showing you a few of her pieces here. And that actually the top left is one of the illustrations from this article. She lists the whole list of things that she believed, and I've just pulled out 3 that I think are really wonderful. I believe that nothing is common or unclean, that the design and decoration of a pepper pot is as important in its degree as the conception of a cathedral. I believe in everything being beautiful, pleasant, and, if need be, useful. So a little more of an aestheticist attitude there, and attached to aestheticism versus arts and crafts, I think. She says, to descend into particulars, I like the opposition of straight lines to curved, of horizontal to vertical, of purple to green, of green to blue. Quite like. And last but not least, I try to make the most appearance with the least effort, but insist that what work is ventured on is as perfect as may be. I really love that one in particular because I've spent some time very closely studying the stitches and some of her embroidery work. And in fact, there was a May Morris exhibition last year in Edinburgh, which was incredible. And it just so happened that I was in our archives on the same day I went to the opening of the May Morris. So I was looking at Jesse Newbery up close and then May Morris up close. And May Morris's embroidery is mind-blowing in its precision. Jesse Newbery's is beautiful, but it's got a slight rustic imperfectness to it that's really, really fantastic too. And the thing about Newbery is that she was very much about anybody can do this. And it's whether you use fine silks to do it or you use cheap materials, you can make beautiful things, and you don't have to have an expert skill like a May Morris to be able to do this. And I think you can see this in her work, and it's absolutely gorgeous. So that's, I realize I'm going off on piece because I started talking about fashion, and I'm going to do that a little bit more in a minute, but I think it's, again, it's for the Newberys, it's not so much about creative collaboration as a union of like-mindedness. And they also shared a love of dressing up, as I said, and I have to put this in. Newbery wrote and performed pageants, including ones for the opening of the school on both occasions. I'm not going to allow myself to get sidelined too much here because the way artists dressed and dressed up is the subject of my PhD. So we would be here another several hours. But I'm going to take a relevant aside here to mention my favorite Künstlerpaar from down south here, which is Walter and Mary Crane. They're good friends of Newbery, in fact, and Walter Crane came up and gave a talk at the art school. Here they are dressed as Cimabue and Laura for fancy dress, but Crane actually goes on and he uses this costume in paintings, and he uses it when he writes an article on how to dress for the Healthy and Artistic Dress Union. But my favorite thing, which you probably can't see here, is if you look, Walter Crane, Laura, and if you look very closely in the middle, that's their little dog, and their dog has a flower collar on, so they dressed up the dog too. So there's nothing new when we dress up our dogs. So yeah, the other thing too, about just to mention about Crane is he actually curated the English section of the Turin exhibition for the Arts and Crafts Exhibition Society. And I either read a note somewhere that Newbery, Crane, and Mackintosh all had dinner together, or I made it up in a fever dream, elaborate fantasy in which I time travel and join them and ask them loads of questions. And I really can't decide if that's real or not. So if anybody knows that's real, let me know that I wasn't just crazy and making up like what I wish happened. So another couple who enjoyed fancy dress, and the last couple I'm just going to highlight quickly and wrap this up, is Jesse M. King and E.A. Taylor. Now I have to say a full confession here. This is, I said at the beginning of the talk, it's a lot of research I've done, some of it I'm doing, and some of it I want to do. And this is the I want to do area. In the sense of like, I've always loved Jesse M. King and I've just never spent the time with her. And every time I regret it. And right now, to prepare for this, I would have gone to special collections at the University of Glasgow. I would have gone to our special collections, but you can't go anywhere and you can't even get a book easily. So I have very little to say on this. I'd love to say much more. But what I can tell you is over here, this is them dressing up as King is actually dressed as the Holy Grail, and Taylor is Sir Percival. And these were costumes for the Scottish National Pageant of Allegory, Myth and History that was performed in Edinburgh on the 13th of June, 1908. And King designed some 30 costumes for the pageant segment devoted to the legend of King Arthur. And so apologies kind of for the rest of the slide. For me, this is such a boring slide because I could show you Jesse M. King jewelry and everything just all day long, and illustration and her work. And Taylor's furniture too is wonderful. And just the internet was failing me for good images for you. But I am showing you this lovely illustration that he did of Kakubri High Street. And this certificate that she made for Glasgow School of Art, which I'll talk a little bit in a second. So King originally shared a studio with the embroiderer Helen Paxton Brown on Bath Street, which was adjacent to Taylor. And in Jude Burkhauser's essay on Jesse King in the Glasgow Girls book, she focuses mostly on her close circle of friends from the art school, including De Courcy Lethwaite-Dewar, Dorothy and Olive Carlton-Smith, and Macbeth, and including the immortals that we saw earlier, Agnes and Lucy Rayburn, the Rayburn sisters. She taught book illustration at the school, and she also did a great deal of work as a designer for the school. And that's the area of research I really want to get into. And I told Karen I have to give her a shout out because Karen gave me an image, who's here in the audience today. But Karen Maley-Watt, I know, has just finished her PhD successfully on the Glasgow Lady Artists Club, which is fantastic. And I know she's done a lot of incredible work I would love to hear more about. What I really want to look at, though, is some of her work she did. She was clearly a designer. I don't know if it was on spec or whatever for the art school for a long time. There's so much in our archives, pieces that were done by her, but I'm very specifically interested in the typography in it, in the lettering rather, because a lot of that Mackintosh font that we see everywhere, it's Jesse King doing it in it. And I'm not saying that she necessarily invented it, but there's a real parallel, and I'm really curious about how King's version of it develops in relationship to the art school and what we see on Mackintosh's work and what ends up getting disseminated in the world and becomes the title screen for American Horror Story in this day and age. So anyway, about their relationship, though, this is another area which maybe somebody else knows more about, because Jude Burkhauser reports that in letters that she wrote to her parents, she characterizes her relationship with Taylor as sometimes unsettling. So I really would like to be able to read those in special collections for myself and see what exactly that means. But she did marry Taylor in 1908, and she kept her name, which was quite radical. In 1907, Taylor had become the head of furniture design with Rag and Company in Salford. And then in 1910, they moved to Paris, where Taylor became second in command of Tudor Hart's Paris School of Drawing and Painting. But before long, the two of them actually established their own school, the Schilling Atelier, and also began a summer school on Arran, which they continued to run until 1940. Jessie M. King had bought the Greengate cottage in Kukubri the year before her marriage. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. And it was to Kukubri that she and Taylor returned shortly after the outset of the First World War. So these were two artists. They're, I think, a bit of a hybrid in the sense of, like, I think they're very like-minded, and again, the symbolist Jessie M. King is well into mysticism and really much into like fairies and a bit psychic, and talks about having a third eye that informs her work and her vision. It's wonderfully bonkers in its own way. But they did actually work together collaboratively, and in fact, they were asked to do murals for the Lanarkshire Education Authorities in Drum Park and Larkhill schools in 1927. Unfortunately, the murals no longer exist. I believe one was destroyed by fire. And that little picture is the one Karen was able to provide me, but there's no, again, the pictures that we could get are behind archives, and there was nothing online. So the picture I'm showing you here is not at all one of the illustrations of the murals, but what I imagine they might look like. And I love it. If all the cats were painted gay, 1930. So bright, colorful murals that may or may not have looked something like this are on the walls of this school right down there. So that's the image. Yes, that image on the bottom right is the school. You know, it's tiny, but the reason it's just tiny down there is you can't see anything in it anyway of what it is. It's just the school. Right, so I don't actually really have any grand conclusions for you today, but I hope at least you've seen some beautiful art. Maybe you've learned a thing or two you may not have known. But I think there's much more work to be done on this subject, on Künstlerpaars. There's certainly work done across art history, but there was something very particular about, I don't know, letting Glasgow flourish and these couples that came together during this period of time. But as for the Mackintosh and Macdonald debate, we might acknowledge that love was the core of their inspiration, that beauty, sensuality, and the eroticism of the works that they created might just signify that these two vibrant artists were besotted. Someone wrote a heart. Their interiors elegant, ethereal, and symbolic mediators of their artistic partnership. They were affected by each other, and now we are drawn to the effect of their affection. Thank you. That's me in silence. Where are you, Stuart?
Thanks. Yeah, I'm back. Thanks, Robin. Very good. I'm sure there's a few questions that are cropping up here. I'm just going through some there where, well, I've got views on this as well. Any thoughts on the flower watercolors being signed CRM and MMM? I presume that's during Warburgswick, the meaning a sign of direct collaboration, acknowledgement of their general work together, or something else. So my views is Mackintosh added Margaret when she was in the vicinity on those paintings. I don't know if you want to add to those, you know.
Sure. So are you asking me? Is Roger here? Is Roger asking?
Roger had problems with his not hearing anything earlier on, so I'm not sure what happened.
That's too bad. Well, then I can speak freely. No, I'm joking.
I am here.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one because I know you.
Roger is here now. He is.
Oh, did Roger? I was like, did Roger ask that? No, I know you and Roger both say that it's adding her because she was present. And I think that's really a valid option. But I don't know, I wasn't there. This is the thing, like where I've struggled with that one in the past is about signatures and what signatures mean on works of art and what they mean on works of design and what stamps mean on works of design. And so do you just throw that idea out? I mean, if you know, it's the same like on the Gessos, did they work on them back and forth? Like, I get why people say it's just kind of like an autograph of remembering the moment and that kind of romantic. And admittedly, I am not the connoisseur of these images. I've not spent lots of time with them to really study closely. So I guess I'm fine with that idea that she's just there.
So we're losing you, Robin. Is Roger?
Like I did today, I gave you my interpretation of the Rose Boudouir. That's my thing, but I'm slightly going off here.
We lost you there a little bit, Robin.
Oh, am I here now?
You're back. You're back with us. Yeah.
Okay. I don't know what you missed, what I said. So
can I say that the evidence, the overriding evidence for who signed or who made the flower watercolors in particular comes from Mary Sturrock.
Yeah.
Was present when many of them were made. She doesn't appear, well, sorry, I'll rephrase that. She wasn't present when they were made, otherwise her initials would be on the drawing as well. But she says that was how Mackintosh worked. And if you go back to his early sketchbooks in 1891, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, he goes sketching with the immortals and he puts John Keppy's initials on, he puts Bertie MacNair's initials on, he puts Catherine Cameron's initials on. So why change the habit of a lifetime, so to speak? And it's not a signature by Margaret. It's not Margaret's signature, it's an inscription by Mackintosh.
So that's Roger, everybody.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't, I don't think that Margaret was busy during much of that period, or at least pre-1921, doing her own thing. She didn't make flower drawings. Mackintosh did.
Yeah.
If she made flower drawings, you'd find them throughout her whole career.
Yeah, that's true. That's absolutely right. And it's not anything like she was doing, and it doesn't look like anything that she did do.
That's a dangerous ground because the gesso panels, as I'm sure you know, don't look like anything she did.
Well, no, that's where we can start. That's where we can start debating, and I'll go ahead and jump back in here for because you know this is a long one. There's on the back, there's photographs of, and I'd like to be able to get back to the questions that the other people are asking as well, to be polite to them.
Sure.
But on the back photographs of I love talking to you about this actually. There's two photographs of the May Queen and the Wassail, which as you know, because I've showed you this. And but for everyone here, they're in the Hunterian, and on the back of them, it's written, and they were probably photographs that were sent ahead to the Vienna Secession exhibition, or were made for that. And on the back of them, it's written in Mackintosh's hand, designed and executed by Charles Rennie Mackintosh, designed and executed by Margaret Macdonald Mackintosh. And again, that's for me is sort of the factual data of what he's telling us there. And I don't feel to refute that. And I feel like saying, well, but the gesso panels aren't like anything else, except they're like each other. There's 16 of them. So, you know, is that to say that Mackintosh designed 16 of these things and she just made them? I mean, I think they are like a lot of her other work, but it is something that we should actually talk more about, I think, in detail. And I find it a really interesting debate. But on the flower thing, I don't have a...
Can I say that I enjoyed your description of the the Wendorfer cabinet in Turin. And those panels remind me more of Jesse King than they remind me of Mackintosh.
No,
And,
I can see that.
You know, if we're talking about where Margaret got her ideas from, she got them from other people. She got them from Frances and she got them from Mackintosh. And on the evidence that you've shown today, she got them from Jesse King. They are the closest.
I think that's a really interesting observation and worth thinking about too. And actually, so Roger, we just need to have a coffee or something, because the thing is too, I'm really curious about the lettering, because I think there's a lot more that comes from Jesse King for all of them than maybe has been given appropriate credit. And I that's something I'd love to spend some more time looking closely at. But that's a really good point about the cabinet. I agree with that, actually.
Can I just go through? I know this.
Please, other questions. I know we could go.
Sorry. Thanks very much, Roger, for your input there. There's somebody's asked, how did the artists work? How were they transported to Turin?
In a van.
How were they transported to Turin?
On a train.
Yeah. Packed into crates and sent on a train and a boat, I guess.
Somebody's asked a question which
they did.
Yeah. We'd all like to see is how
no, but you know what's interesting about that question? What I would say about that question is it is something I've wondered actually about the May Queen and the Wassail, because they were pretty fresh when they were transported to Vienna. And I know from the conservation reports for them and from talking to Alison Brown that they're kind of they were the first two that were made, and they were really haphazardly kind of pinned together in parts. And I always wonder about the damage if they made it intact or if they needed fixed and stuff. But it's kind of an interesting technical question.
Having done a thorough research about Mackintosh couple, have you come across a photograph of them together? Well, I think we'd all like to see that. I think the answer to that is no.
No, we could take the Immortals. The Immortals photograph is the only one but they're not even near each other really in them, which is, I guess, part of the whole, debate. Oh, rewind here, but yeah, we could maybe Photoshop or something, but no, those are the only ones.
Somebody's just asked a question. In 2019, I bought the 27-inch canvas reproduction online of Margaret's White Rose and Red Rose, then hired a local Kansas City artist to embellish it with beads, mother of pearl, paint and hemp like the original has. She's never heard of the Mackintoshes, but did a gorgeous job and created this video. So there's a link there, which I can share with you later. She even used Mackintosh fonts.
That's amazing. Though I hope she didn't put hemp on it, because that is the only panels that actually have twine on them are the Wassail and the May Queen.
Because they're the large ones. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. What I wonder about that one, that's another one of those technical mysteries too. I wonder if they did them and it didn't work very well, because there's a weird thing on the right hand side. Maybe Stuart, we were looking at it together in the thing at the opening, I think, or was with somebody. There's one piece of twine that kind of comes off to the side on the May Queen that's weird, and I always wondered if it was a mistake. You can see it.
I'm not sure if Alison Brown's
you can see it there. Yeah, we've talked about it. It's a bit of a mystery, and it is in the early photographs too. Yeah. So I always wondered if it just maybe was more hassle. But then she does, the story is that she pipes the like a wedding, like you decorate a cake from Agnes Blackie. Right, and
most of the comments are thanking for a great presentation.
Somebody asked
lots of comments there. How long did Margaret and Frances share a studio, and did they create a work for clients outside the Mackintosh pieces? Balance of metalwork versus gesso, other media.
Okay, so I probably should know how long they shared right off the top of my head, and I don't, but I think it was probably about 6 years or something. It was about 18, maybe.
Roger might come into
that. Like 18, was it like 1894 or 5 to about 1899, was it?
96 to 98.
There you go. Okay, so just a couple years. They did do they did do work. I mean, they did work that they sold and they exhibited and such, and they definitely did work that wasn't just for Mackintosh. They were doing work that they were interested in themselves. Only Margaret did gessos. The only gesso that's not by her was sailed by Mackintosh. Now there were other people working in gesso, like Phoebe Anna Tricaire does some things. It's this kind of not so used medium, and it was being taught and talked about. Walter Crane wrote a whole article on how to do gesso, which is, I think, where they got the idea for doing it. Burne-Jones was using it as well. But it was metalwork, watercolor. They did a lot of repoussé work.
They did posters, because they did advertising posters like the umbrella.
And they did advertising posters. The one, of course, they did with MacNair, with MacNair. And so, yeah, I mean, I think mostly exhibiting. They weren't like hugely successful. I mean, selling loads of work or anything as far as we're aware, but they were exhibiting in different societies and some international exhibitions as well. So Archive has, org has 2 volumes. I'm turnips. Yes. Oh, yes. I think I've seen that. That's really good. I'm just scrolling through here.
You're scribbling through.
It's hard because I wish you could capture the chat and you can't.
Yeah, we can save the chat. The chat's saved at the end.
I would say there's a few people who've sent me direct messages, and I probably, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my email in the chat. If you could email me your questions, because I won't, when the chat goes away, when the Zoom ends, so I won't be able to, and you can't copy paste chat. So it'll all kind of vanish, but.
Somebody's made some comments about the V&A, was amazed to find CRM's box with the info jewellery box made and designed by Charles Rennie Mackintosh for his fiancée, Jessie Keppie, whom he jilted to marry Margaret Macdonald. Amazing, and it wasn't put in by the owner, it said, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that will be some curator probably writing a note or something about it that they thought was right. I mean, I love the V&A. I've corrected things on the V&A website myself.
I think yeah, the Met in New York's got a lot of mistakes on its website as well.
There's this stuff everywhere, and that's what's nice. You create a research community, let people know, and I'm sure Roger's probably corrected a million mistakes in his career.
Do you want to just
making what sailors really made? Yeah, no, Allison, thank you. What I meant was, I remember you telling me years ago that when you looked at the back, there were like, it was pinned where it needed to be pinned or something like that, like the way that the things were attached, that it didn't seem very orderly. We were having a conversation, this is literally probably 14 or 15 years ago now. So that's what I was remembering, not that they were super flimsy, but that they were some kind of, but I wondered when they were fresh, how they made the trip. That was more things when everything was attached and new, and the rabbit skin blue and all of that kind of thing.
Somebody's also asked, can you talk a bit about the panel in Vienna, the Sleeping Princess? But that's a whole talk on its own. No, that is. I love that one. It is a whole talk on its own. I mean, I don't know what there is much to say about it other than that it's just that wonderful story about it being, behind a false wall in their collection and having been forgotten about, and then they rediscovered it and did incredible conservation work. What's great about that one is when I was, We're having a talk in June from the curator at the Mac.
Oh, great.
So just to let people know we're still on. We'll have a talk next month, which are dates still to be finalised, on the Mackintosh architecture competition. And in April, I'll be talking to Richard Burrows on 49 Glebe Place, so about the history of Glebe Place. So there's a few things coming in. We've got a number of talks coming up, but we're bolting these in shortly. But the one in the Mac in Vienna will be good. That's on the 10th of June.
Okay, no, I definitely want to come to that. I was just seeing the one thing about that project is there's a wonderful little book that's very, very hard to find that was produced when they did the conservation, and it's got a great conservation study of the gesso panel that, for me, when I was doing this gesso research 15 years ago, was really informative. It's in German, but it was really, really interesting, the technical study for the panels that's in there. Yeah, but I think that's, oh, someone, Mark, where did she learn to do the gesso technique? That's a big mystery, but I think that Walter Crane, it's in the first issue of the studio, and it's called Some Notes on Gesso Work. And Walter Crane talks about the history of it as a medium and how it was used to decorate frames, but he says things in it like, it lends itself to linear decorations such as women like hair and vine work, which is exactly what you're seeing in their work. And they were, of course, reading the studio. So I don't know that she read it, but I would guess that she read it.
Did Fran Newbery not teach gesso at the School of Art?
Yeah, no, there were some class. I mean, it would have been part of the course in design at the school. They were still, I think the 27-point curriculum course in design, but I think it was just, it was used, it would have been used for decorating frames and doing surface decoration on objects. So, but using it in this way, these are basically like movable frescoes in a way. It's, the plaster paint adhering to the plaster surface and the way that they were made. But there's that wonderful story too about Mackintosh actually preparing the surface for her and working in the white studio in their home. I mean, it's all a bit romanticized too. And then there's, of course, the story of her actually doing the decoration in situ at the Hill House for the Sleeping Princess. So, but there's no details documented of exactly how she did this or where.
Well, thanks again, Robin, for an excellent talk, and I'm sure it stimulated a lot of interest in Mackintosh, and it's been great to see such an audience from around the world, which is quite refreshing.